Okay, so I know it's recording now, and it's also live now on YouTube. Okay, so I know it's recording now, and it's also live now on YouTube. Recording now, and it's also live now on YouTube. So we'll start after I do a couple of these. Recording now, and it's live now on. Okay, I'm gonna cancel the feedback. Hmm. Not what I wanted to do. So I'm basically just entering the details of the video. So if you guys can just give me a moment to do that, I think I can end it there. Okay. This can be so complicated. So I think I'm about ready to start. It says that I'm still live on YouTube here. So, and I do believe I have shared it to my Facebook as well. So, for those of you who are watching for the first time, um, this is the 2020 Reprocessing and Empowerment Workshop. Give me just a second. Yeah, it is. So I'm just basically I'm communicating with Tammy. I have her as a guest on here today. And she's another clinician. She's in Ohio. As you guys know, I'm Dr. Lockie. I'm in Jefferson and I'm in Atlanta. And as a psychotherapist, I think that seeing the increased amount of anxiety, depression, adjustment issues around the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, an abundance of clinicians have recognized the need for spaces to be held for people that are grieving and some people who need to acknowledge what grief is or acknowledge what losses have transpired for them during this time. And then further, they just need some validation because sometimes we need to know that it's okay for us to feel, however it is that we feel. And we need to know that it's normal. And sometimes we need confirmation and tips on how to overcome some of the anxiety um, and depression associated with the various losses, regardless of what they look like, not only during this time, but generally in life. So today, we're primarily going to discuss, I guess, the loss and reorganization around the various losses that people have experienced during this time. So I'll give you guys a little bit of tips and guidance around what it looks like for us to be able to recognize what the losses are for us, and then also recognize and help people through the various struggles that they may be presenting with during this time. Sometimes it helps for us to know that a person is going through a thing and be able to call a thing it is, in during that time, in order for us to be able to assist in the best way that we can. So I'm going to talk about the different types of losses that I've identified for the sake of this discussion, and then I'll move into the vast majority of the questions that I've not gotten around to, and the remainder of those clinicians that have joined me the last couple of weeks that are part of the therapist network have not quite addressed just yet. So, without further ado, we'll start. So, on the top of my list is education. So, I want to basically talk about how it is that our kids and many adults are struggling with this loss. And it's a tremendous loss as far as like access to adequate or sufficient education. And so what that looks like, not to discredit the job that teachers are doing, we have to acknowledge the fact that teachers have also experienced a great deal of losses during this time. And they have, I guess, found their way into a place to where I guess they're adapting, but adaptation looks very different now, and it can look very difficult during these times. So teaching kids in the online platform has changed the game in a tremendous way, because there are teachers who only knew how to deliver in-person instruction. And the platforms that many of the education systems have decided to use are not necessarily giving us what it is that we need to be successful. And so if we need to be able to see our kids and gauge the level of education or the level of growth and gauge the level of interaction in the classroom, we're not able to do that as instructors of students. For professors, for teachers who were already in the online platform, they're even struggling as well. I myself as well, I feel like when you're delivering instructions to people, especially in the online platform, you need them to be level-headed and balanced. You need their lives to be calibrated in such a way that they're able to receive what you're giving. And not only are children, small children, struggling right now, but also adults. You have to understand that people are now having an increased amount of screen time, increased amount of boredom, just sheer boredom, and then anxiety around the pandemic, of course, depression associated with the grief process. And I say associated with the grief process because we all know that there have been several basic identified phases or stages of grief. And they're not linear, so they don't go in a particular pattern, but they're definitely there and they're pervasive. And so we have to be able to identify what stage of grief we're in once we identify the loss. And so losing the human connection associated with being educated in a brick and mortar school, or even in an online platform where there is a lack of increased anxiety associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, or increased anxiety, but individuals, right? So just a couple of people having and struggling with anxiety that's going on in there, that has to do with things that they're going on or they have happening in their personal life versus the collective whole, and everybody trying to judge where people should be. So those pictures look very different. So I feel like education is an area that we have experienced collectively a huge loss. The sense of normalcy, like I said, in teaching and the learning, also in the experience. So kids that are graduation ready, kids that should have graduated at the end of last year from the various stages. So pre-K, elementary school graduations, middle school graduations, high school graduations, all canceled or modified to fit the particular area that a person lives in or region based on whether or not they had a tremendous amount of cases. So many kids just missed out on the real experience of graduating. And because it's just them graduating, right? They have dismissed that this is a loss at all, or that they should even be feeling a certain way. And as a result of suppressing those emotions associated with that loss, sadness, frustration, confusion, grief, right? They have become depressed because they've not been able to even acknowledge that this was a loss for them and receive validation by the people around them in their community or society. And so while one person may think that that's a small loss, for them it's a huge loss because that's just something that they were looking forward to, that now the COVID-19 pandemic, something that they have no control over, has taken them out of the being able to experience. So the second thing is job functionality. So many people have worked jobs for close to retirement age, and you got other people who have been on their jobs for a little bit of time, but it's their first job, right? But now that job closed down as a result of the pandemic, or it has changed drastically. The requirements to come to work has changed, and maybe they weren't able to meet those requirements because they have pre-existing health conditions and things like that. So essentially, whereas those people would have been able to contribute in their job market, or where they're working in a particular way, now they're really not able to do that. And because that thing looks so difficult for them, they're not able to openly express what their feelings around losing their job's functionality or how they moved at work and things like that, because they have a fear of losing their job because they failed to adapt, a fear of losing the approval of the people around them because they're telling people how they actually feel. And sometimes this fear can be enough to create inequality amongst people, simply because you got some people that are struggling, but now they have to struggle in silence, and other people who are adapting because they had the type of support that they needed, but they only had access to that support, right? They are the only people that knew that, okay, you know what? I'm having a very difficult time now. I probably need to go see a counselor, a therapist, clergy member, and have somebody to talk about this with. And so those professionals that they're seeing give them the validation that they need and give them the support that they need accurately because they've reached out. But what about you? Right? That person that's suffering in silence. That person needs that validation in order for them to move to a place to where they're able to reorganize. So the next part that I'm going to talk about is personal identity and the huge loss around personal identity. And so when we are in the middle of becoming who we are meant to be in life in general, sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit and say, okay, well, you know, I'm a mom, or, I'm a friend, or I'm a colleague of this particular person, and we travel this journey together, right? It's a part of who we are when we identify ourselves as those particular things. But now, because all of these experiences have shifted in such a way, we can't necessarily identify with all of those different parts of us or parts of who we were becoming, because we're not quite sure if we're really that friend, because our friendships look different. We're not quite sure if we're really a valued family member, because our experiences with family look very different now. And people may have their own anxieties that are building up because they're afraid to get sick, and rightfully so. If you see that there's widespread panic in your environment, the news is only showing you negative media coverage of what this could cause or what this could mean for you. You lose a sense of who you thought you were becoming and who you are. So I think that we have to be cognizant of the fact that this is a loss and everybody is struggling. And so when we're trying to define who we are in these moments, I think that we have to be careful to say it's okay for us to experience life in the way that we're experiencing it right now. And it's okay if we're confused about who we are, where we're going, who we're becoming, what our experiences are, and how they've impacted us, right? So I think that just saying, okay, this is an area where we've lost our abilities to be able to really identify who we are, or really to be able to identify the stage of development that we're in accurately. I think just telling ourselves that it's okay, that permission giving to feel and to be in these moments, I think are vital to our personal growth. So on the next one on the list is holiday traditions. Holiday traditions have shifted. I talked to Tammy for a little while before we started this live, and we talked about whether or not she had experienced shifts or changes. And I think I talked about it a little bit last Saturday. I think because last Saturday was the first time that we convened and had this, following the pandemic and stuff, and had a kind of a widespread discussion. But many people experience Thanksgiving in a different way, and they are planning to experience the Christmas holidays in a different way as well. One of the things that I liked about Zoom is that they opened up the platform for people that didn't have paid accounts to have unlimited minutes, so that they can connect with their family members and they can connect with support groups on that particular day of Thanksgiving. And it wouldn't be such a detriment to not be in the room with those people that we normally would have been in the room with. So it was a way to have Thanksgiving dinner with your family virtually. And I think that that's also a really good way. It's a good idea to do that, or FaceTime, or Google Duo. Um, those are the only ones that I'm aware of that you can do video chat. I guess Facebook has that group thing now. Tammy says she likes the Duo, and it's pretty stable too. Um, but those are the ones that I can think of at the moment that allow you to be able to be in real time and synchronous with a person, and multiple people in video instead of just being on the telephone, because a telephone call can also sometimes seem very impersonal. So the next one is day-to-day traditions. And so I think we all have our rituals. So we've lost the ability to do many of the things that we do on a day-to-day. In some places of this country, not to even talk about other countries where they're completely locked down. But in some places of this country, parks are closed. Still, they remain closed. And people are on mandatory quarantine or stay at home orders from their governors. And in those places, it looks like you can't go out jogging at the park you used to go jogging. You can't get up and go out and connect with your friends. Can't go have a beer with them at the bar. You can't go out and date somebody openly either because the options off the table. Bars, dining places are closed and things like that. Malls are closed. So if you wanted to do shopping to clear the air, you can't do that. There are a tremendous amount of things in our day-to-day interactions that have shifted, that have changed. And as a result, we've lost the ability to have access to those things. And not having access to those things have forced us into a state of isolation or depression. And so I think that recognizing and being able to call a thing is definitely something that we need during this time. Um, the next one is transition trademarks. So birth, transition, funerals, weddings, all of these things that are a part of phase of life development for human beings, where we normally would, celebrate them with huge crowds of people and commemorate losses, also with huge crowds of people being able to come and pay their respects to the people that we have loved so much in our life and have tremendously committed their life and connected with us in a way that left such big imprints on our lives, to celebrate the life that they lived and to honor them as they move on to the next phase of the continuum in death. I think that those rituals, those traditions, and those customs we've also lost. And it's put us at a disadvantage when it comes to being able to express how we feel or even be able to identify what our feelings are when we're losing people, when we're losing experiences, um, when we're losing jobs. People have lost jobs, access to income, lost their homes, lost their way. And all of these things are tremendous, I feel. Um, the other one I listed is bedside accommodations. And so I know it's a really, really tough one. I do grief work in a huge way. It's, a part of one of my specialties. And not to speak down about other professionals in the industry, but sometimes we have so many niches that we lose sight of the importance of being able to really specialize in a particular area of providing therapeutic services to our clients that we treat, by way of not continuing and furthering and specializing in particular areas. So grief is a very complicated process. It's a very complicated area of life and experience in and of itself. And I think that if a therapist is not properly trained in grief work, it's very, very difficult to be able to get the results and meet people where they are when they're trying to navigate the area of grief, because you're not really versed on what to say or what to do or how to hold space or how to really and truly help, because you're kind of forcing people to be in a space, a particular space or stage or phase. And that can be hard. Also, the transference and counter transference can be difficult too. And that's me addressing the clinicians out there. So it's really important when we're working with people um, in therapy that we know the areas that we're not versed on, and we, pursue clinical consultation appropriately. And so bedside accommodations is that one thing that we typically coach clients through as they are navigating the journey of having to go through that process with a family member that has had a terminal illness, like they've been sick for a while, and we know that, okay, the end is near. So those last couple of days, they've been told that, okay, there's nothing that we can do. You can expect it any moment or any day now. And being able to be with your family members in that time, I think a lot of times that experience and what it means to us, we don't really hold it to the value that it really has. But it has a lot to do with how we heal, when we heal, over the process of our healing as we go through the various stages of grief. And so, um, having that opportunity to be at the bedside of your family member as they are dying, whether they're dying from complications and treatment of COVID-19 or they're dying from something else during this time, that privilege has been taken away from us because they don't want people in the hospitals, because they don't want them to get sick unnecessarily or be exposed to the possibility of getting sick. And so being able to be there for births or deaths of family members as they're navigating either part of that continuum is a tremendous loss. And we need to recognize it as such and be able to process it just like we do any other loss. So, in wrapping up this piece, I think it's really important for me to address the fact that this state of our being at this point of our lives as human beings can be very, very dangerous for you. So, unacknowledged losses can lead to deep seated depression because you're still going to be thrown into grief, regardless of whether you want to acknowledge it or not. If the collective losses have affected you or not, you're still going to be thrown into a state of being that puts you on the grief continuum. And so, what that looks like is you recognizing that, oh my God, now I'm in denial. You know, this is a very surreal experience for me. I've never had a family member die. I've never had a friend die. Um, I've never had to go through losing my job, losing my income. I've never had to go through the tremendous onset of this wave, this cloud of sadness. You know, I just really don't want to do anything. Being able to just simply acknowledge the fact that we're still going to be thrown into the grief pattern has a lot to do with whether or not we face medical crises that could affect us thereafter. So many people have heard talks of, you know, family members, husband and wives going out behind one another when they die from a broken heart or complications in, you know, various of areas of their vital organs. So grief and depression, as well as anxiety, can cause the medical complication of inflammatory issues. And so it's really important for us to realize that. And when we realize that, I think we'll do a better job at acknowledging the losses and then navigating the various stages of grief as we need to. So understand that inflammatory issues like pulmonary inflammatory or heart related inflammatory illness, even in your brain, right, in your neural system. So being in a state of grief and being in complicated grief where we're not acknowledging those losses can cause heart attacks and stroke and, you know, other high blood pressure, things like that. Inflammatory diseases cause flare-ups for people who suffer with autoimmune diseases like lupus. And so it's really important for us to be able to call a thing and recognize that we're suffering so that we don't have to do it in silence. Find yourself a really good therapist. Psychology Today has great resources. Goodtherapy.org has great resources. Mental Health Networker. Um, and maybe when I'm done with this video, I'll post additional links and things like that, because I think that that's necessary. Also, when you're needing immediate help and you notice that you're experiencing a crisis, and crisis looks different for every person, having the wherewithal to talk with somebody that is a professional in this industry is very important. I encourage you guys to call 800-273-TALK so that you can be connected to the National Crisis Line, and they can get you the linkage and the referrals that you need to be able to connect yourself with someone to get the adequate help that you need to navigate these various avenues of frustration, anxiety, depression, and grief, um, or even coping, right? Basic coping skills. So that's what I have on that. For tips on managing these various areas of complications of your life during this time, I know it can be very hard to find something constructive to do. I myself, when I have my sessions with my therapist, I sometimes find myself asking, oh my God, huh, what could I do? When I'm asking for the advisements from him, I'm asking myself also, well, what do I think I can do in order to help me through this particular thing? When I'm looking at things that could possibly be viable coping mechanisms for me, in the immediate space of crises, or in the immediate space of high anxiety, or where I've been triggered and things like that, and I've identified that I've been triggered. Sometimes it's hard to pop yourself into the reality to where you're able to take over before your reptilian brain does. And it's really important for us to connect with our own personal understanding and that permission given, like I said, and say to ourselves, it's really okay for us to be in a space, and it's really okay for us to have the necessity, right? Or the desire to be in a better space, right? And so what that looks like for me is basic acknowledgement, but I also want to share with you guys some of the things that I feel are extremely therapeutic. And so having on Christmas music during this time of the year can help you find yourself or find your way back in the mood and in the company of pleasant memories of those people that you've lost, and now you don't necessarily have the space to celebrate in the same way with anymore. When you find that you're saddened by playing that music because it brings you back to wanting them to be back with you physically, and you know that you really don't have access to them, I figure reprocessing in the moment is the most helpful, because then you're able to bring yourself back to a space where you're hurting and create safety around that by way of saying, I know having them back isn't an option right now for me, but I can have them in a different way. Being able to honor them and honor their memory, honor their essence spiritually. I talk about that probably in all of these videos that we've done up to date, but that's really huge as a means to moving into a place of acceptance around people losses. Really, it's probably really good in moving to acceptance around all types of losses, though. But so that part, um, so I just want to be able to name the phases of grief, the different stages. And like I said, they are non-linear. It's really important to remember that piece, because that's something that will help you understand that we're not saying in any way as clinicians that you should be at a particular phase or stage or experiencing a particular thing at any given point. Okay, so give me just a second. Um, also trying to kind of manage the inbox. And that can be difficult too. Okay, thank you, Mr. Scott. Okay, but so um, getting back to this, the different stages are denial. And denial can look a couple of ways. I know that we hear the word denial and we become automatically very defensive about it. It's like, I'm not in denial. But denial can sometimes just look like a bit of shock. Okay. Um, and so we're in a space where, yeah, we know we've gone, we've identified the body, we've sat with the body, right? Because everybody refers to our loved ones after they're gone as a body, right? And so hearing that, it sits with us as, well, they said I needed to identify the body. So I've gone and I've identified the body, I've sat with, touched it, and I know that, my mom, my cousin, my friend is no longer with us. So why does this just feel like a bad dream? It can't be. I just talked to them the other day. We go through that. And sometimes we might go through that a couple of times following a loss. And it's okay. Anger, where we become extremely angry at ourselves, at God. If God is our higher power, Allah, if Allah is your higher power, Buddha, even life, the universe, we become angry at whomever we can become angry with to help ourselves feel like it's okay for the pain that we have currently to persist in the space where it is. And that's okay. Allow yourself permission to understand that anger is just a part of the process. We're all grieving and everybody grieves in their own way. um, Waves of these emotions and these phases may come at different stages of our lives, and it's okay to be angry. It really is. The next one is bartering. If I could just have that person back, you know, I'd trade anything, or moving around the notion that there is some way for you to be able to negotiate the terms of having that person back or being able to see them or talk to them just one more time. And it's okay to be in that space. It really is. Depression, of course, is what we identify as the isolation period where we've disconnected from the other people and we just don't want to do anything. We're pretty much numb to the world. We aren't able to really identify what our feelings are, whatever they are. It's like, okay, well, I feel whatever, but it's not important. And we don't want to give the acknowledgement um, to what we feel, period, because we've deemed it to be unworthy. But I'm here to remind you guys that it's never okay for you to deem yourself as unworthy. But even though it's a part of the process, remember to give yourself what you need to feel worthy. Give yourself what you need to feel whole. Give yourself space to feel whatever you feel and acknowledge that that thing is okay and it is enough. Okay. So it's really important, I think, to be in a space where you're able to feel safe with saying, this is okay for me to be. This is okay for me to feel. This is okay for me to disconnect for a little while. It's okay for me to not return calls. It's okay for me to not pick up the phone. It's okay for me to just want to be by myself. And whenever that comes, you have to allow that to come as it will. And just be okay with feeling. Identify why you're feeling, how you're feeling, and call a thing, and just be in that moment. Hold that space for yourself. And the last one on the list is acceptance. We come into a place where we realize that, yes, this is what it's going to be. And it can't be any other thing else or any other way else. You know, we don't have this job anymore. We don't have schools anymore. We don't have access to go to the clubs anymore. We don't have access to go to the bars anymore. We don't have access to go and visit with our friends anymore. We can't go jogging in the morning at 5 a.m. anymore. We can't go out late at night anymore. This is just life. This is what it looks like. We now have to wear masks everywhere we go because for somebody else's comfort, for somebody else's personal feelings of safety, we have to do this in this moment. Even if you really don't believe in it, right? But give yourself a little bit of credit for being able to come into a place of acceptance because it's very difficult, right? And so um, that ends that part. I feel like sometimes you guys have to work on redefining your purpose on a continuous basis. In order for us to get through this, I think that so many people have adopted the practices of saying we're all in this together, right? This is a collective experiences of losses. This is a collective experience of grief. This is a collective experience of despair. We all feel terrible in this moment, right? And I feel like we've said that for so long that we have lost a complete touch with the reality that we have to do self-reflection on a continuous basis in order for us to stay in a place where we're able to be productive with the energy that we put out in the world. So redefine your purpose continuously. Understand that the purpose that you thought you had may shift during this time. It may shift drastically, it may shift minutely, but it's going to shift more than likely. The job that you had, the way that you did the job that you did. Some of us go from being clinicians that have offices in multiple locations, and we're seeing our clients on a day-to-day and moving from office to office, and now everything is telehealth. Some people have gone from being financial managers where they're seeing their clients face to face in the office every single day in person, and now they can only see them face to face virtually. And some of them don't even know how to work these video conferencing tools, right? It's hard, but it's time to adapt. It's time to change. It's time to reach, dig deep, and grab those resources that are inside of you and make the necessary shifts in order for you to continue to survive in this space in the here and now. And so that you can continue to map out a potential future for yourself, the people that are connected to you at work, the people that are connected to you filially, being your family members and friends. So I've also noted that when you do your personal reflection, it's really important for you to avoid sharing your anxiety unintentionally or intentionally with others in a way to where it can be harmful to them. And then also to avoid shaming, right? So we can call a thing without necessarily shaming people. I think it's been so much going on. I know we've all probably read the tabloids about the whole people feeling like there is a financial inequity or, you know, around the COVID-19 pandemic. So just because people qualified for pandemic relief, you can't shame those people for getting whatever money they got and doing whatever they did with it. Just because people don't have a need for the COVID-19 relief packages, but they also have a wealth of income and savings, and now they're spending it however they want, you can't necessarily shame those people into helping others or putting more money into charities or any money into charities at all, because it's not up to you to live their life for them. It's really up to you to live the best life and the best version of your life that you can for you in your own space. So remind yourself, personal reflection doesn't have to involve personal attacks on other people. It's not up to you to live their life. It's only up to you to live your best life. Okay? So learning, the last one on my list, as far as my tips, is going to be for people to learn to truly hold spaces for themselves and for others. I think that this is a technique that is a necessity. So you're viewing this video live, that means you're on the YouTube already. And so being on my YouTube channel gives you access to the previous videos that I've already made on various subjects, on a variety of coping mechanisms and things like that, and tools and tricks of the trade on how to remain emotionally well and fit. So amongst those are conflict communication tips, anxiety and depression regulation tips, recognizing mental illness and what that looks like, how to help, how to be the best helper. And amongst those tips, you're going to see something about holding spaces or simply being with a person for their needs to be met. Okay. And so what that looks like is you're just sitting there with them as they make whatever complaints they may have to make, or they have discussions about whatever it is that they need to discuss, but you are there for it. Okay. Experiencing that comfortable silence that we don't necessarily give ourselves credit for being able to do. Right? Just be silent. Just be in the space. Sorry. And sometimes just being able to be a party in the same area, right? So on Zoom, we can say we're in the same room with people when we're face to face on video. If you live in a house with someone and they're experiencing difficulties, you can be in person in the same space with them and hold space by simply listening and not necessarily responding to everything they say, but listening to understand them instead of responding. Choosing to listen to understand looks like you're curious in your position in which you sit. So you're asking them questions, you're asking them to elaborate, and you're sitting there and you're listening the entire time attentively. And you're just holding space, simple silence the entire time. Okay. And I think that this is a very important quality for us to learn, because we have to know that people have their own ways of coping and dealing with and recognizing that they have things that they need to deal with. Okay. So that concludes my tips. And now I will access the many questions you guys have. So give me just a moment while I pull these up. And then I'm also going to go over the questions from the past couple of weeks that I've not had a chance to address just yet, because I know it's really important that I kind of get back to all of the inquiry that you guys have had, time to express an interest in. So give me just a moment while I open up this feed. And I'm going to mute this for feedback. Okay. Okay, so that's done. Um, so on the YouTube feed, I don't have any questions on there, and I'll jump to these questions and I'll go down the list. But now I should be able to see it, I believe. I'm gonna type to see if I can see it. Okay. So the thread is open and I can see that one. So let's see. How do you go through balancing life while also processing and reprocessing in an effort to cope? Mm, okay. So I think that that's a question for me personally, um, or a general question. And so my response is, um, and maybe that's kind of while I was already going through some of the tips that I named, but I think that balance has a lot to do with acknowledging that you are off balance, right? And so acknowledging that things are different for you than they have been previously, acknowledging that there is a struggle for you to maintain a certain level of equilibrium in your day-to-day things. And so I would say the most important thing to do would be for you to move into a place of acknowledgement that your routine is off so that you may identify the areas where you're off balance or off kilter or off of your normal routine. And that way you can restructure those parts of your life. I talk about the importance of restructuring or reorganizing yourself as the highlight of this conversation because every single person has definitely been infected by the COVID-19 pandemic's anxiety, right? Or grief spectrum. The anxiety piece of that has a lot to do with trying to gauge what's next, trying to gauge what will be open next, what will be closed next, and how that affects your life, your everyday life, your work life, your personal life, your love life, you know, your social life, and your sense of identity. We talked about those things. So I think that balancing or recalibrating your energies to a point to where you are sufficient and in operable mode means that you have to identify the areas where you've gotten off kilter, and then kind of exploring some of the things that you can do to get yourself back on base. And so that can be difficult too. Both of these are very difficult things. The identifying part takes a lot of personal self-reflection that's very honest. And not that we are dishonest people in nature, but we are definitely people who don't necessarily always recognize when we have a need for improvement. Just, it doesn't just jump out at human beings, right? I think a lot of people have been like doing things that aren't necessarily conducive of their overall growth, you know, over the continuum of life. And because we feel like, well, there's always tomorrow, we can put things off and put things off and put things off. But that's not something that we can always recognize and say, hey, this is the thing for me. That's something that I do and I need to improve. I need to get better at gauging this particular area of my life. And so I think that that's how I'll answer that question. And that came from a Facebook group. So the next one is, how do you plan as if you are still living hopeful amidst the pandemic? Hmm. So the way that you worded your question beckons another question from me. Are you one of those people who believe in positive reinforcement? So you feel like you got to fake it until you make it, kind of like you got to put on a facade in order for you to be able to move through the various difficulties of life. Um, and when you answer that question for me, I'll be able to kind of gauge it a little bit better. Because if you are one of those people, you know what? Let me do it like this. If you're one of those people that need to put on a face or fake it until you make it when you have difficult challenges in life, this is what I'll tell you. Create a vision board. Sit down, create a vision board. Clip out things that interest you from articles, whether it's a sweater, whether it's a bike, whether it's a car, and things like that. Map out what you would like to see in your immediate future or your distal future, and be able to kind of put that together in a way that allows you to see the things that you would like to happen manifest. And then it will give you hope. It will help to instill hope where hope has been lost. Does that make sense? And then put hope on your list of losses during this pandemic. That's what I want everybody to start doing after this particular feature. I want everybody to adapt a means as to list their loss so that they can adapt means as to how they want to start grieving. Sometimes you can identify where you are in the continuum of the grief stages, right? But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you got to map out how you're going to grieve when you see that you're going to suffer a loss, or when you see that you suffered a loss and you are in recovery mode. And so identify that, get your vision board done, and let me know how I can help and assist further after that. So the next question is, how do you handle the holidays knowing your loved ones will not be there? Well, there is no universal answer for that one. In life, sometimes we have to sometimes walk into a place and give ourselves permission to feel and respond appropriately. And I think that that's what has to happen here. So, have you ever wanted to go swimming really, really bad, but you can't tell the temperature of the water, right? The room's kind of warm. You're like, yeah, yeah. But you don't want that water to be too cold, right? And so you just, what do? Dip a toe in, dip a foot in, a leg in, and then we're in here. We're getting a feel for the water, and then eventually you move in a way that suggests you have comfort in that space and in navigating that space. So I think that when you look at grief in the same way, sometimes you're not quite sure what will happen, how you will respond, or where you'll be emotionally or mentally, or even physically, financially, after losing loved ones. But sometimes you have to just give yourself a little bit of a nudge to move into that space, to see what that space will look like, to know what you need. Just know that when you get there, if it hurts a little, if it hurts a lot, give yourself permission to hurt. If you're off a little or you're off a lot, give yourself permission now beforehand to seek out help in navigating that arena. We have to reorganize after we've experienced loss. That's the only way for us to continue to be functional human beings and continue to live. Because, like I said, when we experience a loss, whether it's a loss of people or it's a loss of a job or a loss of anything, it causes inflammatory issues in our body. And we would hate to be in a medical emergency type of situation to where now you're at risk of having a heart attack or a stroke or, high blood pressure and things like that that could lead to those things inevitably. And so I think that we have to do the work that is needed in order for us to be in a place to where we may adapt. So um, that's how I answer that question. You're welcome to email me offline. I know that's a Facebook question, but you can send me an inbox message or send me a direct email at doclqj at familiarbonds.org, and then I'll address your concerns as well. Let's see. The next one is, what if your therapist is missing in action? How do you cope with increased anxiety? That's a really good question. Um, I think that my immediate response is, like I just have been talking about, permission giving. Because you're now in that space, right? When your therapist goes MIA, give yourself permission and let yourself know it's okay to be a little anxious, because there are a lot of people losing their lives right now. There are a lot of people that are being adversely affected by COVID-19, therapists included, medical personnel included. Everybody is affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you are one of those people who are saying, well, yeah, no, I'm not affected, then you're just basically one of those people that are in denial, and you taken the route to turn a blind eye and say, well, I don't see this stuff happening, so it can't affect me. But it still doesn't mean that you've not been affected. And so, in knowing that, it's okay to feel a little anxious, it's okay to be worried. Reach out. If after that third email, third text attempt, if you are seeing a clinician that uses an EHR that has enabled end-to-end encrypted text messaging, if after you've reached out to their office and they still haven't responded, I suggest looking for you an interim therapist or looking for another therapist altogether, just so you can remain calibrated. Okay. Um, let's see. Scroll down. How do you avoid becoming upset with people who are out of compliance with the suggestions of the CDC? Well, I think that you have to recognize that people still have the freedom to be whoever they are, however they are, just as you have the same said freedom. And you have to put yourself in a place where, in respecting the person that they are or are becoming, you are accepting that it's okay for them to be just that, and do what you can to protect you. I keep stressing to people the importance of making sure that you have a personal bottle of disinfectant spray to make sure that you're covering the bases around you, but also to make sure that you social distance. Mask or not, stay away from people that you do not know um, their condition, and I mean, sometimes that may include family too, but you still have to protect yourself. If you are skeptical, just stay away or keep your spray. Stay away and keep your spray. Um, do what you can to protect yourself and reduce your own personal anxiety. That's what I say. Um, Next question is, how do you handle suicides of family members? From a clinical standpoint, I handle suicide of family members as what it is. And I think for every clinician that follows the National Suicide um, Association, I think when we follow their guidelines, I think that we recognize that exposure to suicide by way of a family member committing suicide, um, or even attempting, is an increased risk for that person to become suicidal as well. And so you have to gauge it um, as it is. And for if the question's on the outside and it's asking for you to um, be given suggestions or tips as to how you should navigate life after being exposed to suicide, I would suggest the first thing is moving into a place of understanding that um, suicidal ideology is something that people can struggle with every single day. They can struggle with thoughts and the reflections of, what if I were to wake up dead tomorrow? What if my life were to end today? I don't want to live in this space anymore like this. I don't want to live in this life anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. All of those things are examples of viable suicidal ideation, but not in and of themselves are they considered to be an immediate threat. A person becomes an imminent threat when they have suicidal ideation with a plan or without a plan, but means or access to lethal means. Okay. And so limit your access to things that could um, end your life. Limit the access of people, other people, and family members that you know may be suicidal, their access to lethal means. And more importantly, become an advocate for not only change, but personal autonomy for people that are struggling with suicidal ideation. And the most important thing that I can say to this point is to understand that suicidal ideology and the attempts made to end a person's life and the successful ending of a person's life is nothing to be seen as weak. It takes a tremendous amount of strength from a person in order for them to take their own life or even move on it. But even more, it takes a tremendous amount of sadness and grief and despair to find themselves in that place. And so I think that we have to be people that reach out and hold on to those people to give them the type of love and support that they need so they have viable supports, and we create a sense of ambivalence instead of determination around suicide. So that would be my answer for that. Um, we're coming up on 6 minutes and we still have quite a bit to cover, but I'm going to try to do my best and be thorough. The next one is, how do you handle all of the increased violence and death? Um, I think you have to take it day by day, moment by moment, and continue to be a person. The biggest thing that I see as an issue with society now is that we're seeing so much inner city violence in large cities like Atlanta. Um, that it's just so much of it. It's an abundance. So it's almost like people are numb to feeling. Um, and so we have to sometimes take a moment to simply reflect on who we're becoming in these moments. And I say take each death a moment at a time, a second at a time. Just take the deaths, as they come, one at a time, so that we can reflect on the life and the value of that life that was lost. So we can give validation to the many hearts that are broken as a result of, these extreme losses. And we have to become people that come together in these times and provide security, connectivity, and support for our brethren. The next one is my son lost an opportunity to graduate this year. How do I help him cope? He's been really defiant. Mm. So, one would be assuming that you think that his defiance is connected to him losing the opportunity to graduate. And I'm guessing, and I can't be sure because I don't know and you didn't say, that his defiance began after he missed the graduation, or maybe when he became aware that he would miss the graduation. But either way, I would say creating a safe space for him to feel, but also and think and be, but also connecting him with viable support in your family system or in your network of connectivity, whether it's your neighborhood or whatever. There are a lot of different support groups, and this is one that's viable as well. Um, and he can connect with us on Saturdays for this 2 hour window from 4 to 6. Signing up for something like that, where we're just holding spaces for people and answering their questions and addressing them and allowing them to vent. Um, but I definitely feel you. I have teenagers of my own, you know, uh, and sometimes we just have to hold space, and that's it. Just be curious and hold space, and that's all. Okay. Just don't be in a rush to fix. Is what I'm saying. Um, how do you prevent the spillage of work and pandemic stress in the home? Man, work and pandemic stress. I think that you have to deal with the stress that you have as the stress becomes an issue for you. And so instead of masking and denying that you're stressed out, or moving into a place where you feel like you're unaffected at all, acknowledge that your behaviors have changed. And that comes through self reflection. And I tell people, always give yourself space to do some honest self reflection. I'm a person who believes that the most healthiest people in this world are people who are reflecting on self and evaluating self honestly on a weekly basis at least, because you're then giving yourself an opportunity to see what's changing, and you're tracking what's changing. Okay. And so if you don't have access to a daily living questionnaire, send me an email. I don't mind sharing the resources with you guys for free. I want everybody to be mentally and emotionally fit and well during this time. I know we're all struggling, and I definitely want to be a resource for you guys. Um, but I think that we have to be reminded that it's really important to not carry work home, right? And not carry home to work. And so we have to be able to manage and regulate our emotions appropriately by first identifying what we're feeling on a primary level and a secondary level, and sometimes on a tertiary level. But we have to be able to say a thing is a thing. So I know I still have a couple questions that I didn't get to, but we're out of time for today, and then I will address those questions on next week's 2020 reprocessing and empowerment workshop. And until then, you guys remain emotionally healthy, safe, well, and do your part I challenge you guys to do your part and create some safe space for people to share during this very difficult time in their lives. That's all I've got.